I'm Jimmy Lewis, and today we are talking about Yamaha's 2023 WR250F. And so this bike is Yamaha's competition trail bike, although they sell it completely corked up, and we never rode it completely stock, kind of like our 450. So it comes with a headlight, tail light, 18-inch wheel, kickstand, and very restricted stock. So stock, the ECU is locked. There is a restrictor inside of the airbox. There is a throttle stop, and then it comes with a very restrictive muffler. This is actually the muffler off the FX. We'll get to that in a second. But so it's super quiet. The throttle only opens up about half. And we are using it as a dirt bike, a competition dirt bike. So what we did was uncorked it. So with the competition ECU comes a new throttle stop, and then you can take the smallest pea shooter out of the muffler, and that's how we rode it most of the time. And then we also ended up getting the map switch up here, and then also the Wi-Fi module so we can talk to it through the power tuner app, which is super awesome. And so most of the time we were riding it with a stock muffler, just trying the bike out. And really, as a trail bike, this is a really good bike, even with the stock muffler. There's one big thing that changes when you go to a more open muffler, which, by the way, seemed to be very hard to get at the moment. And that's why we ended up borrowing the one off of our FX. We just borrowed our FX muffler to open it up, just to make sure that we were on point with all of our findings. So the motor is, well, you know this about Yamahas. They are the best in class 250cc four-stroke. It's largely because of the architecture of the engine, where they have that intake completely turned around. So the intake is in the front, the exhaust is in the back. This muffler does a 360-degree around here before it goes into the back of the exhaust. It has a wide ratio transmission. And the other thing that this bike comes with is a cooling fan, which is really good for the type of riding that we were doing on it. We were getting it hot, and that fan was definitely coming on and off quite a bit. So this bike makes really good torque and super smooth power. It's ridiculously smooth with the stock muffler on it, and it's really quiet, but it's noisy through the intake. So to the rider, you hardly even notice it, like when we've gone to the FX muffler, which is quite a bit louder. The rider hardly notices it, but people around them really do. But the power is super linear, very drivable, and there's not a lot of snap or throttle response with the stock muffler. You have to do a very big throttle turn to get the power to come on. It comes on and it's smooth, but what happens when you go to the more open exhaust is it brings on that character. And essentially the bike, especially with the competition ECU, runs exactly like an FX. And then you have two maps. You have the aggressive map, and then you can push the button and you can get a more mellow map when you have the light on. And then you can tune it with the power tuner app to your liking. So that's where we're at with the motor. The clutch action is really good. The bike, like most 250Fs, can be a little bit prone to stalling, and we also noticed that depending on which map you were in, it tended to stall a little bit easier sometimes. So that's something you can play around with in the mapping to get a little bit more throttle response. But clutch action was good. We got it nice and hot. Actually, we don't use that. We're not abusive on the clutch, but it will take a certain amount of abuse, but it has really good feel and a relatively, we'll call it, long engagement. It's not really sharp like some other bikes that are a little bit more like an on-off switch. It's really good at being kind of able to modulate it when you need to. And once we got that pipe on there, the torque was really good. Actually, the torque is the same no matter what pipe it is. It's just when you want a throttle response, you don't get the throttle response with the more restrictive exhaust. The more open exhaust definitely gives you some throttle response, and then the mapping really works, especially with the FX pipe, because essentially that's what it is. On to the suspension, and this is one thing that Yamaha has really become notable for. They're basically spring fork, the Kayaba spring fork, and linkage rear shock are just on point. And so what I've noticed compared to older WRs is they have definitely found a slightly stiffer setting. And this setting is a little bit more like the FX, but not as rigid, or it seems like it moves through the stroke better, but still retains that really good bottoming resistance that we like. And it's definitely not motocross stiff by any means. It's still supple and plush. The WR has its own valving stack and characteristics. They've gone up a little bit on spring rate, so what that really did was got the bike to handle a little bit lighter. And if it's too stiff for you, so at 200 pounds, I found it almost perfect for trail riding. For racing, I'd want it to be a little bit more stiff. That's because I'm heavier, but for the right weight, the 170-pound person, this is going to be right up your alley, and you're not going to need to stiffen it one bit. In fact, I think that you'll find a lot of guys will want to be like lightening up on the compression a little bit. But what we found is as you lightened up in the compression, it actually made the bike start feeling heavier. It did get a little bit more supple, but I think that in the suspension setting, Yamaha was really trying to aid the handling feel of the bike. So it's kind of what you expect. You know, it's kind of along the lines of more of like the FX models of some of the other brands, not so much like a KTM EXC or an old Honda CRF-X. It's a little bit more like, you know, the FX or RX. So good on Yamaha for kind of doing that. And it seems like it's definitely will work in a wide range of situations, which this bike sort of needs to do. So the handling on this bike is, well, it's improved. And the little changes that Yamaha has been doing to the YZ in the chassis department have finally made it to the WR. And they are very picky about the engine mounts they use, the head stays, the different things, but the tuning of the chassis. So just like the YZ got a lighter and more precise feel, the same is true for the WR. And it was actually quite noticeable. I think more so because of the suspension setting, but it definitely has a more nimble, kind of lively feel. The bike, you feel a little bit more of the ground, but it also is more responsive to what you want it to do. It steers better through the foot pegs. You get better feel through the handlebars. The way it turns in just seems to be a little bit better. They might have lost a tad bit of stability or stability feeling. It's not unstable. It just doesn't feel like it's tracking as well, especially like on loose rocks compared to the old one. But that's such a minor payoff for everything else that it does. Even when you're in the loose rocks, I think it's partially that lighter feeling is maybe what's translating to the bike not seeming as stable. So the ergonomics, the seat to foot peg could be a little bit low for, you know, some taller riders. Actually, most riders, I think. A taller seat probably wouldn't hurt this bike one bit, and I know we found that on the YZ in the past also. But some other things that kind of go along with it, the brakes are really good, not too strong, not grabby at all, very progressive, good feel, both front and rear. The tires, I have never been a big fan of the MX-33s, but this bike is changing my mind. It's just the way that this bike has worked on so many different conditions. I'm kind of happy with the tires they chose. But the bike is slim. Some people have complained in the past that it gets a little bit wide up through here, but it's so much better than it used to be visually. And I think that it's more of a visual thing than anything else. All the controls are where they need to be. The handlebars have adjustable position in the clamp if you need to. The headlight does a decent job at night, but it's a little bit focused, and the multimeter is kind of a nice touch. And with the stock ECU, it'll show you how much fuel you still have in the bike and give you kind of some options for doing different trips and stuff like that. So overall, they've, you know, narrow, light, they're kind of meeting the goals, the trends that people want to have on this type of a bike. So the big question is, how good is it? Man, it's a great WR. It's a really good overall motorcycle. And the question is like, what is it actually for? My feeling is that this bike is, the more you're leaning towards trail riding, that's where, in wanting a 250F trail riding bike, that's where this bike really comes into play. It's easy to get it to be sort of whatever you want with the power tuner and the competition ECU. If you decide to go that route, you could make this bike into anything, and all you really need is a muffler at that point, and it'll do just about anything. The suspension, in my opinion, is set up for what we'll call aggressive trail riding, and it would work really good at more GNCC and hare scrambles, more single track trail, like National Enduro kind of stuff, racing, and it transitions into that just fine. It doesn't need to be modified at that point. If you were going to do more kind of western desert stuff, it's probably a little bit on the soft side. I think at that point maybe starting with an FX as a base is better for that. But if you're looking for a bike with lights for some reason, this is kind of your only choice in the Yamaha line, this and the WR450. So it's it's got the protection. You could just take this bike out completely stock and have a great time. Not completely stock, uncorked we'll call it, and have a great time. And it doesn't take much to make it into something that you're right in there in the 250 class with the power that you need, the drivability, and control and the suspension. So overall, really good on Yamaha for keeping the WR around. The strange thing is it's not available in California for some strange reasons. But it's available every place else, and we had a great time riding it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop us an email, mention us in the comments, and we'll get back at you.
If you liked what you saw in this video, come check us out over at dirtbiketest.com on the webs. We have bike tests, product tests, a lot of fresh dirt, and you can even support us by clicking through our links. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the trail.